The maid flinches too late, and the bruises give her away. The boss's smile disappears, replaced by a look that has ended lives without warning. The question isn't if he'll act, it's who he's about to destroy. Her sleeve slipped while setting down his breakfast tray, revealing bruises she'd tried desperately to hide. The maid stammered something about being clumsy, but the Mafia boss saw what she couldn't say: the finger-shaped marks, the layered shades of purple and yellow, the fear that made her hands shake. What she didn't know, he'd just decided she was under his protection, and nothing in this world would stop him from keeping that promise. The Mafia boss didn't believe in accidents. At 6:42 a.m., he sat in the glass-walled office overlooking his private estate, reviewing security reports most people would find impenetrably dull. But the Mafia boss wasn't most people. He was a man trained to see what others missed: the micro-expression before a betrayal, the hesitation before a lie, the way fear changed someone's breathing pattern. So when Naomi Morgan walked into his office carrying his morning coffee, he noticed immediately that her sleeves were pulled down too far. Not just down. Deliberately stretched past her wrists, the fabric clutched in her fists like she was holding something together. Or hiding something. "Good morning, sir," she said softly, her voice barely louder than the sound of her footsteps on marble. It always was like this. In the 3 months she'd worked at his estate, he'd never heard her speak above a careful whisper. Never seen her make prolonged eye contact. Never watched her move without that practiced caution, like someone walking through a room full of tripwires. "Morning, Naomi." He watched her approach his desk, every movement deliberate and measured. She set the porcelain tray down with both hands, and that's when it happened. The sleeve slipped. Just for a second, maybe 2, but it was enough. Dark bruises wrapped around her wrists like ugly jewelry. Some were fresh, deep purple and angry. Others were fading to that sickly yellow-green that meant they were days old, healing in layers. And they weren't random. They were shaped. Finger-shaped. Someone had grabbed her. Hard. Recently. His eyes caught them before she yanked the sleeve back down, and he saw her entire body freeze. She knew he'd seen. "Naomi," he said calmly, setting down his tablet. "Sit." "Oh, I should really get back to." "Sit." It wasn't loud. The Mafia boss never needed to be loud. Volume was for men who'd never learned the difference between power and noise. She sat in the leather chair across from his desk, looking like she wanted to disappear into the cushions. "What happened to your wrist?" "Nothing, sir. I'm just clumsy." She forced a laugh that sounded like something breaking. "I bumped it on the kitchen counter yesterday. While cleaning." The Mafia boss leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same focus he'd give to a contract he suspected was rigged. Naomi Morgan was 26, according to her employment file. Petite, with dark skin and natural hair usually pulled back in a neat bun beneath her uniform cap. Brown eyes that rarely lifted from the floor. She was thorough, quiet, professional. Those were the qualities his estate manager had emphasized when hiring her. But his estate manager hadn't mentioned the fear. Because that's what the Mafia boss saw now. Not embarrassment about being clumsy. Fear, raw and bone deep. "Both wrists?" he asked gently, noticing how she was unconsciously rubbing her other arm. Naomi's face went pale beneath her bruised, something else he'd missed before, hidden under careful makeup. "Yes. I'm very clumsy." "Show me." "Sir, really, I'm fine." "Naomi." He kept his voice soft but unyielding. "Show me." Her hands trembled as she slowly pulled back both sleeves. The bruises mirrored each other. Finger marks on both wrists, dark and deliberate. Someone had grabbed her with both hands. Held her. Hurt her. The Mafia boss felt something cold and familiar settle in his chest, the same feeling he got before making decisions that couldn't be unmade. He'd built his empire in shadows and silence. He'd done things that kept him awake some nights. Made choices that lived in the gray spaces between right and wrong. But he had rules. Lines drawn in concrete. And one of those lines was simple: you didn't hurt people who couldn't fight back. Someone had hurt Naomi. Someone had grabbed this woman hard enough to leave marks in different stages of healing, and she was terrified enough to lie to his face about it. Who did this? Nobody. I told you, Naomi. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. I'm going to ask you one more time, and I need you to understand something. You work in my house. Under my roof. That means you're under my protection. Do you understand what that means? She looked at him with those frightened eyes, and for a moment he thought she might tell him. Her lips parted slightly, and he could see her weighing options in her head: truth against consequence, hope against history. Then she stood up abruptly. I really should get back to work. The breakfast service. Naomi. But she was already backing toward the door, her orange and white uniform a blur of motion. Thank you for your concern, sir. I promise I'll be more careful. And then she was gone, practically fleeing from his office. The Mafia boss sat in silence for a long moment, staring at the door she'd closed behind her. Then he picked up his phone and made the call that would change everything. I need a full background workup, he said quietly. Naomi Morgan. Current employee. I want to know everywhere she goes, everyone she talks to, and anyone who's put hands on her. He paused, watching the sun rise over his estate through the glass walls. And I want it quiet. She's scared enough already. What the Mafia boss didn't know yet was that Naomi's fear had a name, a face, and a history. What he didn't know was that the man who'd put those bruises on her wrists had done it before, to her and to others. What he didn't know was that this man believed himself untouchable, protected by a system that looked the other way. But the Mafia boss would learn all of this soon enough. And when he did, he would do what no one expected: he would dismantle that protection piece by piece, using intelligence over violence, exposure over bloodshed. Because true power wasn't about how much damage you could cause. It was about how much you could prevent. 3 months earlier, Naomi Morgan had walked through the gates of the estate for the first time, carrying nothing but a worn duffel bag and the weight of secrets she'd sworn never to tell. Naomi's hands were still shaking when she reached the kitchen. She gripped the edge of the marble counter, forcing herself to breathe slowly, deliberately. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the technique her therapist had taught her before she'd stopped being able to afford therapy. He saw, asterisk. The thought circled her mind like a vulture. The Mafia boss had seen the bruises. Had asked questions. Had looked at her with those sharp, calculating eyes that missed nothing. And now he knew she was lying. Naomi pressed her palms flat against the cool stone, trying to ground herself in the present moment. The kitchen smelled like espresso and fresh bread. Morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Outside, gardeners moved across perfectly manicured lawns. Everything here was controlled. Ordered. Safe. Safer than anywhere she'd lived in the past 2 years. That was the cruelest irony: she'd found sanctuary in the home of a man whose reputation was built on violence. A Mafia boss who could end lives with a phone call felt less dangerous than the man who'd once promised to love her forever. You're overreacting, asterisk. Marcus's voice echoed in her memory. Asterisk, I barely touched you. Asterisk. Naomi squeezed her eyes shut, but the memories came anyway. 18 months ago, asterisk asterisk. The first time, it had been almost gentle. A hand around her wrist when she tried to leave an argument. Firm enough to stop her. Firm enough to leave a shadow of a bruise the next morning. Marcus had apologized. Brought her flowers. Cried and said he didn't know what had come over him. The stress at work. His mother's illness. He'd never do it again. And Naomi had believed him because love was supposed to involve forgiveness, wasn't it? The second time, 3 weeks later, the grip was harder. Both wrists. Hard enough that she'd worn long sleeves in July to hide the evidence. No apology that time. Just a warning, asterisk, don't walk away from me when I'm talking to you. Asterisk. By the fourth time, Naomi had stopped counting. She'd gone to the police once. Sat in a cold waiting room for 2 hours, trembling, rehearsing what she'd say. When they'd finally taken her statement, the officer, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, had asked the questions that made her stomach turn. Did he hit you in the face? Asterisk. No. Did he threaten to kill you? Asterisk. Not explicitly. Any witnesses? Asterisk. No. Ma'am, has he violated the restraining order? Asterisk. She didn't have one yet. That's why she was there. The officer had sighed, printed out forms, and told her she could file for an order of protection. But he'd also said something else, quieter, like he was doing her a favor. Asterisk, these cases are hard to prove. You might want to try couples counseling first. Asterisk. Naomi had left without filing anything. She'd tried leaving on her own instead. Moved to her sister's place across town. Changed her phone number. Blocked him on everything. But Marcus had found her anyway. He always did. He was a senior investigator with connections in places that mattered. He knew how to work the system, how to stay just inside the legal lines while making sure she understood she couldn't escape. The last time she'd seen him, 3 weeks before she'd taken this job, he'd cornered her outside a grocery store. You think you can just disappear? Asterisk, his voice had been casual, almost friendly. Asterisk, I know where you're staying, Naomi. I know your sister's schedule. I know when her kids get home from school. Asterisk. The threat had been implicit but crystal clear. So Naomi had done the only thing she could think of. She'd found a live-in position where Marcus wouldn't dare follow. A place with armed security, surveillance cameras, and a reputation that preceded it. She'd sought refuge with a criminal because criminals, at least, were honest about what they were. Naomi opened her eyes, blinking back the moisture that had gathered there. The kitchen was still peaceful. Still safe. But for how long? She moved mechanically through her morning routine, clearing breakfast dishes, wiping down surfaces, preparing the dining room for lunch. Muscle memory carried her through tasks while her mind spun in anxious circles. What would the Mafia boss do with the information? Asterisk. Would he fire her for lying? Asterisk. Would he ask more questions? Asterisk. Would he? Asterisk. She froze mid-step, a stack of plates balanced in her hands. Someone was watching her. Naomi could feel it, that prickle at the back of her neck, the weight of unseen eyes. She'd learned to recognize the sensation over the past 2 years. Hypervigilance had become her constant companion. She turned slowly, scanning the hallway beyond the kitchen door. Empty. But when she moved to the dining room, she caught a flicker of movement in her peripheral vision. One of the Mafia boss's men, she thought his name was Marco, standing near the entrance to the east wing. He wasn't looking at her directly, but she could tell he was aware of her presence. Paranoia, she told herself. She was just being paranoid. Except at lunch service, she noticed him again. Different location, same careful distance. And in the afternoon, when she was changing linens in the guest wing, she heard footsteps in the hallway behind her. When she turned, no one was there. But the faint scent of cologne lingered, expensive, unfamiliar. By dinner preparation, Naomi's nerves were stretched thin as wire. She was arranging place settings in the formal dining room when Mrs. Chen, the estate manager, appeared in the doorway. "Naomi, dear. How are you settling in?" It was an odd question. She'd been working here for 3 months. "Fine, ma'am. Thank you." Mrs. Chen studied her with kind but shrewd eyes. "You know, if you ever need anything, if there's ever a problem, you can come to me. This is a safe place." The emphasis on safe was deliberate. Yes, ma'am. Thank you." Mrs. Chen nodded slowly, like she'd confirmed something to herself, then left without another word. Naomi stood alone in the dining room, her heart pounding. "They know, she thought. The Mafia boss told them, and now they're watching me." But as the panic began to crest, a different thought pushed through. "They're watching me, Not watching her to intimidate. Not watching her to corner her alone. Not watching her the way Marcus used to watch her, possessive and predatory. They were watching her the way security guards watched someone under protection." Naomi sank slowly into one of the dining chairs, the realization washing over her in waves. The Mafia boss had meant what he said. "Under my protection, For the first time in 2 years, someone with actual power had looked at her bruises and decided they mattered. Had seen her fear and decided to do something about it. She didn't know what that something would be. Didn't know if it would help or make everything worse. But as Naomi sat in that elegant dining room, surrounded by wealth and quiet watchfulness, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a very long time. Hope. Fragile, terrifying hope. The Mafia boss had built his empire on 3 principles: information, patience, and precision. Violence was a tool, sometimes necessary, occasionally inevitable, but never the first option. That's what separated him from the men who tried to take his territory over the years. They'd been hammers looking for nails. He was a scalpel. And right now, he needed information. "Marco." The Mafia boss didn't look up from the surveillance monitor on his desk. "Come in." The door opened immediately. Marco Bassetti had been with him for 8 years, former military, tactically sound, and more importantly, capable of discretion. He was also one of the few men the Mafia boss trusted with assignments that required finesse over force. "Boss." Naomi Morgan. The new maid. "I need everything." Marco's expression didn't change, but the Mafia boss caught the micro-adjustment in his posture. The slight tension that meant Marco was recalculating expectations. Everything meaning. Background. Full history. Previous addresses, employment, relationships, especially relationships. Anyone she's had contact with in the past 2 years. The Mafia boss pulled up a file on his tablet, skimming details he'd already memorized. "She's scared of something. Someone. I want to know who." "You want me to ask her directly?" "No." The Mafia boss finally looked up, meeting Marco's eyes. "I want you to watch her. Discreetly. Where she goes, who approaches her, whether anyone's following her when she leaves the estate." "But Marco," he leaned forward slightly. She doesn't know you're there. She's already terrified. I don't want to add to that. Marco nodded slowly, and the Mafia boss could see him processing the unusual nature of the assignment. Just surveillance? No, intervention? There it was. The question Marco was really asking, are we going to kill whoever did this? Just surveillance, the Mafia boss confirmed. For now. And if we find someone bothering her? You report it to me. You don't engage. You don't threaten. You definitely don't touch anyone. The Mafia boss held Marco's gaze. This isn't that kind of job. Marco's eyebrows rose a fraction, the most surprise the Mafia boss had seen from him in years. No threats. No blood, the Mafia boss clarified. Not unless I give you explicit authorization. Understood? Understood, boss. After Marco left, the Mafia boss turned to the second monitor on his desk, the one connected to the estate security system. He pulled up the footage from this morning, rewinding to 6:42 a.m. He watched Naomi enter his office. Watched the sleeve slip. Watched her panic and flee. He played it 3 more times, studying details. The way she'd clutched the sleeves even before the accident. The deliberate care in her movements, like someone who'd learned to take up as little space as possible. The flash of terror in her eyes when she'd realized he'd seen the bruises. This wasn't someone who'd been hurt once. This was someone who'd learned to live with fear as a constant companion. The Mafia boss opened a new file and began documenting patterns. Naomi Morgan, Behavioral Analysis ***. Physical Observations ***. Multiple bruises, different stages of healing, indicates ongoing abuse. Finger-shaped marks on both wrists, someone grabbed her, held her down. Possible facial bruising hidden under makeup, right cheekbone area. Hypervigilance in body language. Avoids eye contact consistently. Startles at unexpected sounds. Behavioral patterns ***. Arrived 3 months ago via Mrs. Chen's recommendation. Works longer hours than required. Rarely leaves the estate on days off. No visitors. No phone calls, unusual for someone her age. Declined staff social events, 3 occasions. Working hypothesis ***. Subject is escaping someone. Abuse is recent and ongoing. Abuser likely has means to track or locate her. She chose this position deliberately, high security, live-in, isolated location. Question: why hasn't she gone to the police? ***. The Mafia boss sat back, tapping his pen against the desk. In his experience, there were only a few reasons someone didn't involve law enforcement. Either they didn't trust the police couldn't help them, or the person they were afraid of was connected to law enforcement. His jaw tightened. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. Mrs. Chen stepped in, closing the door behind her. She'd been with his family for 3 decades, long enough to read his moods before he spoke. You wanted background on Naomi, she said, setting a folder on his desk. I made some calls. Quietly. And? She was married. Divorce finalized 14 months ago. Ex-husband is Marcus Whitmore, senior investigator with the Cook County State's Attorney's Office. The Mafia boss went very still. Mrs. Chen continued, her voice carefully neutral. According to my source, there were concerns during the marriage. A few complaints filed, then withdrawn. The divorce was contentious. She got a restraining order, but it expired 6 months ago and she didn't renew it. Why not? My source says the ex-husband has friends in the system. The kind of friends who make paperwork disappear and complaints get lost. Mrs. Chen met his eyes. She tried to get help. The system failed her. The mafia boss absorbed this information in silence. A state's attorney investigator. Someone who understood the law well enough to weaponize it. Someone with connections, with power, with the ability to make a woman's life hell while staying technically legal. She's not paranoid, he said quietly. She's being hunted. That would be my assessment. The mafia boss pulled up the estate's external security footage, scanning the past week. Has anyone unusual been near the property? Not that I've noticed. But I'll review the logs. Do that. He made a note on his tablet. And Mrs. Chen? Increase her security clearance. I want her moved to the East Wing, closer to the main house. Tell her it's because we need someone reliable nearby for early morning service. Mrs. Chen nodded, understanding immediately. The East Wing had reinforced doors, panic buttons, and direct sight lines to security stations. She'll be safer there, Mrs. Chen agreed. After she left, the mafia boss returned to the security monitors. He cycled through different camera angles, studying the perimeter. And then he saw it. A gray sedan, parked on the access road just outside the estate's eastern boundary. It had been there for 40 minutes. Long enough to be suspicious. Not long enough to be obvious. The mafia boss zoomed in, enhancing the image. The driver was alone, watching the estate through binoculars. He took a screenshot, ran it through facial recognition software connected to his network of contacts. 3 minutes later, he had a match. Marcus Whitmore. Age 38. Senior investigator, Cook County State's Attorney's Office. Naomi's ex-husband. The mafia boss stared at the screen, his expression unchanged. But inside, something cold and calculating clicked into place. So the threat had a face. Had a name. Had already made the mistake of coming to his territory. He picked up his phone. Marco. There's a gray sedan on the eastern access road. I'm sending you the location and plate number. I want to know every time he comes within a mile of this property. And I want to know everything about him, where he lives, where he works, who he knows, what he eats for breakfast. A pause. And Marco? He doesn't know we're watching him. This stays invisible. The mafia boss ended the call and turned back to the monitor. Marcus Whitmore sat in his car, watching. Let him watch, the mafia boss thought. Let him think she's alone. Because soon, Marcus would learn what happened when you hurt someone under the mafia boss's protection. And by the time he understood, it would already be too late. The file Marco delivered 48 hours later was thicker than the mafia boss expected. He spread the contents across his desk: police reports, court documents, employment records, witness statements that went nowhere. The story they told made his blood run cold. Marriage, 3 years, 2 months ***. Naomi had met Marcus Whitmore at a charity fundraiser. He'd been charming, successful, respected. A rising star in the state's attorney's office with a reputation for integrity. They'd married 8 months later. The first police report came 6 months after the wedding. Complainant states husband grabbed her arm during argument. Visible bruising. Complainant declined to press charges. Incident logged as domestic disturbance. ***. The second report, 3 months later, told a similar story. And the third. And the fourth. Each time, Naomi had tried. Each time, something had stopped her from following through. The Mafia boss read deeper, finding the pattern. After the second report, Marcus's supervisor had called Naomi personally, expressing concern about the stress his investigator was under, suggesting perhaps couples therapy would be more constructive than criminal proceedings. After the third, the responding officer had been someone Marcus knew. The report was filed but somehow never made it to a prosecutor's desk. After the fourth, Naomi had shown up to give her statement and been kept waiting for 6 hours. When she'd finally left, exhausted and defeated, the case was closed for lack of complainant cooperation. The system hadn't failed her by accident. It had failed her by design. Divorce proceedings, 11 months ***. The Mafia boss read through the court transcripts with growing fury. Naomi had filed for divorce and a restraining order simultaneously. Marcus had responded with a countersuit claiming she was unstable, she was the aggressor, she needed psychological evaluation. 3 colleagues from the state's attorney's office had testified as character witnesses for Marcus. Upstanding citizen. Devoted husband. Under tremendous stress from a troubled marriage. Naomi's evidence. Photographs of bruises, medical records, a detailed journal, had been challenged at every turn. Could have been self-inflicted. Dates don't match testimony. No corroborating witnesses. She'd won the divorce but lost everything else. The restraining order was granted for 6 months, then allowed to expire when Marcus's attorney argued it was no longer necessary given the completed dissolution of marriage. Post-divorce, 14 months ***. This was where the file got darker. Naomi had moved 4 times in 14 months. Each time, Marcus had found her within weeks. No direct contact, that would violate the restraining order while it was active, but he made sure she knew he was there. A car parked outside her apartment at night. Following her to the grocery store, staying just far enough back to avoid accusation. Showing up at her workplace, just happened to be in the neighborhood. When she tried to file harassment complaints, she'd been told the same thing. No direct threats. No physical contact. Nothing we can prosecute. One officer had been blunt, ma'am, your ex-husband is a senior investigator. If he wanted to violate the order, we'd have evidence. Maybe you're just noticing coincidences. The implication was clear, you're being paranoid. You're the problem, So Naomi had stopped trying to get help from people who would never believe her over one of their own. She'd gone silent. Gone invisible. And then she'd come here. The Mafia boss closed the file slowly, his mind working through implications. Marcus Whitmore wasn't just an abuser. He was an abuser who understood exactly how to weaponize the system meant to protect his victims. He had connections, credibility, and the institutional knowledge to stay just inside legal boundaries while making Naomi's life a living nightmare. He was smart. Careful. Protected by a network of people who valued reputation over truth. The Mafia boss stood, walking to the window overlooking his estate. He'd dealt with dangerous men before. Drug dealers, arms traders, corrupt politicians. But they'd all operated in the same world he did, a world where power was direct and consequences were immediate. Marcus Whitmore operated in a different world. One where power wore a badge and hid behind procedure. The Mafia boss pulled out his phone. Marco. New priority. I need everything on Marcus Whitmore that the official record won't show. Bank accounts, phone records, travel history, relationships, especially anyone else he might have hurt. He paused, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of blood and gold. And Marco? Start looking for vulnerabilities. Everyone has them. I want to know his. Because if the system wouldn't stop Marcus Whitmore, the Mafia boss would find another way. A better way. One that would leave Marcus with nothing left to hide behind. The evidence arrived in waves. First, the financial records, transfers made in Naomi's name that she'd never authorized, accounts opened with forged signatures. Then the emails, recovered from a server Marcus thought he'd wiped clean. Each document was another brick pulled from the foundation of his carefully constructed lies. Naomi watched the pile grow from her position at the Mafia boss's table. She'd taken to working there in the afternoons, the penthouse strangely peaceful despite. Or perhaps because of who owned it. Lorenzo didn't hover. He simply appeared occasionally, setting down espresso or nodding at a new file before disappearing into his study. There are others, she said one evening, holding up a printout. Look at the pattern. 3 other women, all in tech, all suddenly left their companies within 6 months of working with Marcus. The Mafia boss leaned against the doorframe, reading upside down. Have you reached out? One responded. Naomi's voice caught. She said she'd help. If I went first. If I went first. The words hung between them like a challenge. Across the city, Marcus was unraveling. His assistant had quit. His lawyer was asking uncomfortable questions. The board had requested an informal chat. Nothing concrete yet, nothing provable, but the walls were closing in, and he could feel it. He made calls. Pulled strings. Reminded people of favors owed and secrets kept. For every door that closed, he forced another open through sheer will and the weight of his reputation. But reputation, like houses built on sand, could shift. You look different, Lorenzo observed one morning, finding Naomi already awake, already working. It was dawn, light just beginning to creep through the windows. She glanced up, surprised. Different how? Taller. He poured himself coffee, his movements unhurried. You're standing straighter. Naomi hadn't noticed, but he was right. The constant hunch, the unconscious making herself smaller that had become second nature, was fading. She'd slept 4 hours last night. Then 5 the night before. Not perfect, but progress. The evidence is solid, she said, redirecting. Multiple sources, multiple witnesses. If we go public. When, the Mafia boss corrected quietly. When we go public, Marcus won't be able to spin this. It'll destroy him. Lorenzo sat across from her, his dark eyes unreadable. And you? What will it do to you? The question landed heavy. Going public meant exposure, scrutiny, having her life dissected by strangers. It meant facing Marcus in a different arena where his weapons were words and optics instead of manipulation and control. It meant war. But Naomi thought of the woman who'd messaged her, waiting for someone else to go first. She thought of whoever might come after, if Marcus was allowed to continue. She thought of the girl she'd been before him, and the woman she might become after. I'm ready, she said. The Mafia boss nodded once, a gesture that felt like a contract signed. Then we move. It started at 6 a.m. with a single article. By 6:15, 3 more outlets had picked it up. By 7, it was trending. By 8, Marcus Holloway's name was synonymous with predator, and the internet had done what the internet does best. It found everything. Naomi watched from the penthouse as her phone exploded with notifications. News sites. Social media. Messages from people she hadn't spoken to in years, all saying the same thing. Asterisk, I believe you. I'm sorry. I should have known. Asterisk. The Mafia boss stood by the window, coffee in hand, observing the city below with the detached interest of someone watching a chess game play out exactly as predicted. Channel 7 just picked it up, Naomi said, her voice hollow with disbelief. They will all pick it up. His tone was matter-of-fact. That's how these things work. One domino falls, the rest follow. He'd orchestrated it perfectly, timed releases, strategic leaks to journalists he knew would dig deeper. The evidence they'd compiled didn't just expose Marcus, it buried him. Financial fraud. Harassment. A pattern of behavior spanning years, with witnesses finally willing to speak because Naomi had spoken first. By noon, Marcus's company had released a statement placing him on indefinite administrative leave. Corporate speak for "we're cutting ties, please don't sue us." By 2 p.m., his board had issued their own statement, announcing a full internal investigation and the immediate suspension of all projects under his direction. By 4 p.m., his allies, the ones who defended him, vouched for him, assured everyone this was just a misunderstanding, had gone silent. Statements were retracted. Photos were untagged. People who'd stood beside him at galas suddenly couldn't remember his last name. Naomi watched it all unfold with a strange numbness, like watching a building collapse in slow motion. She'd imagined this moment countless times, the vindication, the victory, but now that it was here, she felt oddly empty. You're not celebrating, the Mafia boss observed, glancing at her. Should I be? That's your decision to make. She thought about that. About what this moment meant. Marcus's empire was crumbling, yes, but she'd had to tear herself open to make it happen. Every article quoted her words, analyzed her choices, debated whether she'd waited too long or acted too soon. But other women were coming forward now. The one who'd messaged her. 2 more who'd stayed silent for years. Their stories were different but the pattern was the same, and together they formed something undeniable. Marcus Holloway wasn't just exposed. He was finished. It's done, Naomi said quietly, more to herself than to him. The Mafia boss set down his coffee, his expression unchanged. Almost. She looked up sharply. What do you mean? Exposure isn't the same as accountability. His eyes met hers, dark and certain. We're not finished yet. The feeding frenzy lasted 3 days. Marcus's former allies didn't just abandon him, they devoured him. Business partners who'd shared cigars and secrets suddenly discovered irregularities in their joint ventures. Board members who'd laughed at his jokes voted unanimously to terminate his contracts. The tech community, which had once celebrated him as a visionary, now competed to distance themselves the fastest. Naomi watched his LinkedIn connections drop by the hundreds. Watched speaking engagements get cancelled. Watched his Wikipedia page get edited in real time, each refresh adding another scandal, another allegation, another nail in the coffin of his legacy. They were always waiting, the Mafia boss said, reading over her shoulder. Powerful men collect enemies. The moment he showed weakness, they struck. Poetic justice? Naomi asked. Just justice. He handed her a folder. The DA's office is opening a formal investigation. 3 counts of fraud, 2 of coercion. Your testimony will be central, but you won't be alone. She opened the folder, scanning the names. 6 other women. A former employee ready to testify about financial manipulation. A journalist who'd been threatened into silence. The house of cards hadn't just collapsed, it had caught fire on the way down. That night, Naomi did something she hadn't done in 2 years. She cried. Not the silent, swallowed-down tears she'd perfected during her marriage. Not the numb, hollow grief that had followed her escape. This was different, raw and ugly and somehow cleansing. She cried for the girl she'd been, for the time she'd lost, for the version of herself Marcus had tried to erase. The Mafia boss found her on the penthouse balcony, mascara-streaked, shoulders shaking. He didn't say anything. Just stood there, a silent presence, until the storm passed. I thought I'd feel different, she managed finally. Stronger. Triumphant. You are stronger. He lit a cigarette, exhaled smoke into the night air. Triumph comes later. When? When you decide what you want to build next. The words settled over her like a blanket. What came after survival? After justice? After the man who'd tried to destroy her was finally destroyed himself? The Mafia boss had already arranged everything else: new security protocols, legal protection, a team monitoring for retaliation. Marcus's reach was severed, but safety required vigilance. Trust, but verify. Protect, but prepare. I want my company back, Naomi said suddenly, the word surprising even herself. Not his version. Mine. The one I envisioned before he. Then take it back. The Mafia boss's tone was pragmatic, certain. You have the evidence. You have the allies. You have me. For the first time since this began, Naomi felt it. Not hope, exactly, but something close. Possibility. Space to breathe without waiting for the other shoe to drop. She was free. Truly, finally free. Chapter 9, Protection. 6 months later, Naomi walked into her own office. Not the sterile corporate space Marcus had curated, where every detail reinforced his vision and her irrelevance. This one was hers, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, warm light, furniture she'd chosen herself. The company she'd built from the ashes of her reputation, staffed with people who believed in the work, not the performance. The bruises had faded months ago. The ones on her skin, at least. The others took longer, but they were healing too. She slept through most nights now. Ate meals without her stomach twisting. Walked into rooms without scanning for exits. The Mafia boss had made it possible, though he'd never acknowledge it that way. She still saw him occasionally, always brief, always purposeful. A text confirming security updates. A call about legal developments. Once, he'd appeared at her new office unannounced, spent 5 minutes examining the locks and cameras, then left without explanation. He never asked for gratitude. Never positioned himself as savior or hero. He'd simply done what he'd promised, kept her safe while she rebuilt herself into someone who didn't need protecting anymore. Their final face-to-face meeting happened on a Tuesday. Naomi found him at the same cafe where this had all begun, though she suspected he'd chosen the location deliberately. Full circle. Poetic closure. The kind of thing men who dealt in power understood instinctively. Marcus took a plea deal, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. For years, asset forfeiture, permanent ban from holding corporate positions. The Mafia boss nodded, unsurprised. Acceptable. More than acceptable. It's over. Then why are you here? The question wasn't unkind, just direct. Naomi had learned he communicated in efficiency, no wasted words, no unnecessary sentiment. To say thank you, she said simply. For everything you didn't have to do. He studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind his dark eyes. Then he leaned forward slightly, voice quiet but certain. "You're safe," he said. "That's all that matters." It wasn't dismissive. It was a statement of fact, a confirmation that the contract between them had been fulfilled. She was safe. The threat was neutralized. The story was complete. Naomi stood, understanding this was goodbye. "What happens now? For you, I mean." A slight smile, rare and fleeting. "Same thing that always happens. Someone else will need help. I'll be there." She believed him. Later, she'd hear the rumors that spread through certain circles. Whispers about a mafia boss who'd shifted strategies, who protected instead of destroyed, who wielded mercy like a weapon more dangerous than violence ever was. In a world built on fear, protection became the most dangerous power of all. If you're ready for the explosion coming in the next story, smash subscribe, hit like, and stay close for more mind-blowing and exciting stories.